Well, I think firstly the aim was to raise awareness about human rights abuses committed in Turkey. I think at the moment the relationship between Turkey and UK mean that they're often being hidden in secrecy, that they don't get the desired attention in public media or in government debates. It's very important that civil society activists who work on the issues come together to discuss potential avenues for accountability, for seeking redress for victims, and generally highlighting the lack of action by the UK government. Well, hopefully, it has inspired people who were in the audience to continue to raise awareness about abuses, continue to take initiative to pressure the governments into taking action, into considering and acting upon the sanctions submission. I also hope it opened the debate for potential policy reforms to look into how to strengthen, especially the UK sanction regime, to ensure that there's accountability for lack of action taken and see how we can ensure greater oversight over the sanctions process.
The Erdogan regime has committed widespread human rights violations for the last several years. We've seen the arbitrary detention of over 300,000 people. He's shut down over 2,000 institutions, including 131 media outlets. For a time, Turkey was the worst jailer of journalists in the world. I believe now they're back up to number 4 after having gone down to 6 for a time being. So, I mean, the scale of the atrocities is quite large. And then we have specific Turkish Canadians now living in Canada that were illegally abducted, tortured, and arbitrarily detained from Pakistan and Bahrain, respectively, back to Turkey. So, you know, there's a lot of ground to cover, and there's a lot of really atrocious human rights abuses that have been happening and that continue to happen. And you know, the point we made in the panel is that, especially because impunity is pervasive domestically within Turkey, it is so incredibly important to pursue justice and accountability for these victims, whether that takes the form of targeted sanctions, universal jurisdiction prosecutions. Really, it should be all of the above, and the international community really does have an obligation to pursue these avenues and stand up for victims.
So, uh, Michael Polak and I, we're putting together these sanction submissions because we think that sanctions can play an effective role in deterring human rights abuses, and in particular, having an impact on the sense of impunity that people have in a number of countries today, where they feel that within their country they can commit human rights abuses and there'll be very little that can happen to them, or nothing. And so we think that that sanctions can be effective, that they can not only have an effect upon the individuals themselves, but they can also raise the level of consciousness from individuals in a country, so that people know that what they do does matter and they can be held to account if they do, if they are gross abuses of human rights, that people are going to notice this and that people could take action. Okay.
So the United Kingdom has the Global Human Rights Sanctions Regulations, which is our version of the Magnitsky Sanctions. And what they're supposed to do is to be used against the worst, worst breaches of human rights. So those people who torture, kill, or use slaves. And sometimes they're very effectively used by the UK government. If you look at the sanctions list online, there's people from countries all around the world, from Colombia to Pakistan to Saudi Arabia. But in the case of Turkey, there's no Turkish nationals there in regards to the torture and abuses which are happening in Turkey. So we've made submissions to the UK government to say they should add on a number of individuals that we've named to them to that sanctions list in relation to 3 particular situations. One's the case of Erdem Semih Yildiz, who was a lawyer who was tortured because his clients wouldn't speak to the authorities, so he was tortured because of his role as a lawyer. The other is a case of Gökhan Akınkoglu, who was a teacher who was tortured over 10 days until he died, and he was posthumously found not guilty of the offences they put him in prison for. They knew he wasn't actually suspected of any offences when they put him in prison as well. So that's a very important case. In the case of Helfeti Sanlufa, which is a Kurdish town where the whole town was tortured, and when their lawyers came to defend them, they were also tortured there. We say these are 3 very important cases, and the UK government should sanction the perpetrators and those responsible, prosecutors, the head chief of police for those areas as well, who should have stopped this torture from taking place and should have been involved in it.